My name is Cody Clarke, and I was born in Park Slope, Brooklyn. So much popping up. In 2011, I started Kill the Line Films, which is my film studio / production company, everything, distribution. It's just my own movies. It's just the moniker that I've used since then. Yep. I started it because I realized that with DSLRs, I could do the kind of movies that I wanted to make that I thought I had to convince somebody to let me, make. I thought it would cost me like hundreds of thousands of dollars to make the kind of movies that looked how I wanted them to look. But when DSLRs came along, as opposed to the DV era of just standard digital video to tape. When I saw what the DSLRs were capable of, that kind of Canon 5D T2i era, I realized that, I can make movies that look exactly how I want them to look. And so once I realized that, it was just the floodgates opened creatively, because I realized there was nothing stopping me. I didn't have to wait. I didn't have to be greenlit by somebody else. I could greenlight myself. My biggest inspiration at that time was probably the technology, more than it was a person, because I really do believe that in order to do anything well, you need to build a relationship with what you're using. So if it's a pen, it's got to be a pen that you know really, really well if you want to draw those lines the way that you want to draw them. With me, it was finding a camera that I knew could do what I wanted to do, and then learning its own likes and dislikes. Because every camera, whether you pay $50,000 for it or $500 for it, it has likes and dislikes. It can do stuff well, it can do other stuff terribly. And when you learn that, when you actually build a relationship with that device or that piece of technology, that's when you really, I think, find your own style and your own mode of expression. So I think more than being influenced by particular filmmakers, which of course I am, like everybody is, I'm influenced by what the camera is telling me as far as what it wants to do. I think the most important aspect of filmmaking is your personal connection to what you're trying to do. Much like a writer comes out of them and it comes onto the page, you have to think about it coming out of you onto the camera. Traditionally, film has always been this thing where you need tons and tons of people, you need tons of money, and we're in this era now where it can be this kind of one-to-one translation from the artist to the medium, and we need to take full advantage of that. So when you are making something, don't think about all the other things you're going to need. Most of those things are pretty archaic. You don't need necessarily a room full of people to make a movie. It can be just you and a camera and maybe somebody else. It's been that way in some scenes in all my movies. There's always been times where I'm just the only one doing stuff as far as crew. If you think about it like you are a painter, or you are a writer, or you're a musician, like you're somebody with a guitar, you're somebody with a pen, whatever it may be, that's when filmmaking can actually be what I think it was always destined to be. I look at the first 100 years or so of film as basically a prologue to what we actually have now, which is we have the democratization of the art form. It finally belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the gatekeepers. I think the biggest misconception about filmmaking is that it costs a lot of money, and if it doesn't cost a lot of money, it's going to look bad. People assume that if you don't spend a lot, it's going to look like trash, because people still have it brainwashed in their head that like low budget equals like shooting on a VHS camcorder or having bad sound or any of these things, and it's just not true. We just have these, they're essentially ghosts. They don't exist anymore. We have these ideas of what you can and cannot do, and it's just not true. I've made movies for no money that sound great and look great, and your equipment cost is essentially your studio cost, because once you buy a camera, once you buy a couple microphones, maybe a couple lights, that just carries over to different projects. So you might spend like $3,000 on your first film, but your second film you could probably make for the cost of MetroCard swipes, because you could just use that same equipment over and over again. It doesn't expire once you shoot the movie. I think when you look at it from that perspective, I think a lot of people will realize like, oh, I can do a great looking, great sounding movie for extremely cheap if I just make that initial investment. So it's like buying a laptop and then being able to do 100,000 different things on it for the next 10 years or whatever. It's that same thing, and I hope people eventually break out of that idea that like filmmaking is this expensive thing or else it's bad. It's just not true. When people make stuff that's really bad, 99% of the time it's because they're using their equipment improperly. You can buy the best microphone in the world and you can buy the best camera in the world, and many people do that for their short film that they raise money for on like Indiegogo or crowdfund it in some way. They'll buy the best stuff, and then because they have no relationship to the equipment that they're using, they'll use it improperly. Their movie will look terrible, and they will come away from it thinking that they suck or they needed better equipment or they needed more help. I would rather make a movie with a camera that I know really, really well that's maybe 20 years old than a camera that just came out that's allegedly the best camera in the world that I have no relationship with whatsoever. You know, I don't know the menus, I don't know which buttons are where, like the sense memory is completely wrong. I got no business using that camera. That's what I would hope people recalibrate their brain to, is money has nothing to do with filmmaking. Filmmaking is your relationship to equipment, and that's worth its weight in gold. That's priceless. The best moment I had making movies was seeing my movie Rehearsals, which was my second film, in a theater for the first time. And it wasn't the best projection. It wasn't the best sound, although all that was fine, and anybody watching it besides me did not see that at all. You know, it's totally invisible to anyone but the filmmaker. I think seeing your work on a big screen and seeing that it plays on a big screen, you know, filmmakers talk about, oh, does it play on a big screen or does it play on a small screen? Because sometimes you'll watch movie on a small screen, you don't get the same experience at all. I knew my movies played on a small screen because people would watch them and they'd usually watch them on their laptop and say, oh, I really like that. So I knew it worked in that intimate setting. When I saw Rehearsals on a big screen, and Rehearsals is probably my most experimental movie still to this day. Very fly on the wall. It's just footage of people living their lives. When I saw that the movie worked on a big screen and people were engaged with it and followed it like they would be following any movie they went to see, that was this huge burst of confidence that has carried through my entire filmmaking career thus far. My worst filmmaking experience was probably a film that I tried to make in the Hollywood system. After I made my first film, I had this great idea for this second film that attracted the attention of a Hollywood producer, actually many Hollywood producers. It became this many years long process of doing it the quote unquote right way. There were name actors and actresses that were very interested, and it all eventually fell through because the way that things are made out in Hollywood, it's not about actually finally doing it. It's about going through the process of as though we're doing it and then seeing if the stars align in this very greedy, manipulative way where they essentially try and break a filmmaker down to fit a mold that is ever changing. If somebody new is attached, you're expected to change your mind on everything that you care about in order to fit what they like about the project. And then once they're not interested, then it becomes somebody else that you have to appease, or it becomes a combination where you're appeasing one person and appeasing another person, and it just keeps being this thing where it just, whatever was interesting about the project erodes away to the point that you don't even care about the thing anymore because it doesn't even resemble what you wanted to do with it. Luckily, that project failed, but that was probably the worst experience because it was years where I could have just been making my own stuff and should have been making my own stuff. It was eye-opening because it made me realize I never want to work within the Hollywood system. It was the most stressful time, and I wasn't even making anything. I was talking about making things. I I was having meetings, I was having notes, I was, all the annoying processes that they love, by the way. They they can't get enough of it because it means that they don't have to stand by a finished piece of anything. Have a career in Hollywood for decades and decades of totally unfinished products. It's never seen as a failure. It's seen as just doing business and being professional. There's no point where somebody would take them aside and say, wow, you haven't actually produced anything in like 10 years. All these projects fall flat. You should probably get out of here. You should probably move home or whatever. Nobody would ever do that to somebody entrenched in the Hollywood system. But outside the Hollywood system, it just seems ridiculous that you would never have completed projects. With me, I just try and complete as many ideas as I have that lead to projects that I can do. That's how it should be. It's about completing and releasing work. And that's probably what draws a lot of actors to me and to wanting to work with me, is because they know if they shoot with me, it's not going to end up on a hard drive and never see the light of day. It's not going to be unfinished. It's not going to sit around. It will actually be released, and I have a proven track record of that. The world opens up to me, and I'm grateful for that, for sure. That project that failed, the Hollywood studio project I was trying to do, bits of the story have definitely seeped into other work of mine, so it would be hard for me to do that exact project again because so much of it has kind of been cannibalized by me and put into other stuff. But there are kernels of that I still haven't used yet that I do want to use, but I don't know that to the untrained eye anybody would see any resemblance between that project and something where I felt like I was finally doing the pieces that I enjoyed from that. But that's part of the fun of doing art, is that like you can repeat yourself in a lot of different ways that aren't actually repeating yourself. There are filmmakers that definitely repeat themselves in a very on-the-nose way. Only an artist actually knows whether they're truly repeating themselves or not, because a lot of it's invisible. A lot of it's stuff that you'd really have to take a fine-tooth comb to the finished work to really see how much it was influenced or how much it's drawing from previous work. What keeps me motivated with making movies is basically after you finish a project, there's this time period where you still have momentum. People wonder sometimes when I'm able to go from one movie to another movie to another movie really fast, like how can you do that? Why can't you just take a break? And it's because you atrophy creatively a little bit. Your creative muscles, they break down and they get a little weaker if you stop, if you take that kind of vacation opportunity. Whereas I feel like the stars will align for you if you just keep that momentum. So if you piggyback projects as much as possible while you're still riding that high of that last project, you can do like 3 feature films relatively in a row, which is what I just have come off of. And I've done that, years ago I did like 3 films in a year, and then just recently I've done 3 films in a year essentially. I'll probably take a break now, but you can get probably 3 films out of 1 film if you just ride the momentum and that current. Basically the current wants to take you along. The muse wants to use you as a conduit to bring art into this world. If it sees that you're able to finish something, it wants to just get back into it right away. So the muse is like raring to go. So if you seize that moment, you can have a pretty large body of work with minimal effort, I would say. If you take a break between every single project, it's so much harder to get back onto that horse. You should always kind of stay on the horse if you can still ride, if you can still go. My favorite aspect of movie making is probably also my least favorite aspect, which is editing. I think when you're finally sitting down and you're editing, you're really actually doing the work. Everything is preparation for that. And I'm very distrustful of filmmakers that don't want to be a part of the editing process at all. If you direct something, you got to see it through to fruition. You really have to edit it. You have to sit with it. I can understand people using people to assemble the clips in order for them or import the stuff. I get that totally. But the actual editing process a filmmaker should be doing. So I love the editing process because you're actually seeing what works and what doesn't work, and it's not subjective anymore. You had ideas while you were shooting, you had ideas while you were writing of what a good line would be or what a good shot would be. And when you're editing, you're actually finally seeing, oh, was I right or was I wrong? And you need to go through that process where the things you were wrong about, you just kind of take in stride because you've edited a bazillion of these things before and you don't have any sort of ego blow or whatever. A healthy editing process is basically just this completely stoic, objective oh, that shot was wonky, I can't fix it, I'll find a workaround. I like the solution aspect to it. I like the puzzle piece aspect to it. To me, that's filmmaking. It's probably the purest part of the writing process. When you write a screenplay, it's just ideas. Oh, I think this line will work here. And in editing, you find out that it kills the pace of the entire scene. And so you just cut that line out or whatever. I like the editing process for that reason. And I think to deprive yourself of that process, to only focus on shooting, you're really not actually filmmaking at that point. You're basically a crew member on your own thing. You're just somebody who pressed a button on a camera or held a light or held a microphone. The filmmaker is often the person who's editing the film. And you can see that with, great filmmakers when they switch editors. Sometimes it's a bit of departure from the what they were known for. They have to kind of find themselves again. There's been many cases of that through film history where an editor is gone, maybe an editor died, and suddenly the filmmaker is, stuck without a head and kind of has to figure things out. Editing process, absolutely. It's the best part. It's the part where you become a filmmaker, I think. It's also my least favorite because it's grueling. It's hard. It's harder than shooting something by far. It's harder than writing something by far. I think as you make a film, it just gets harder and harder and harder, but it also gets easier at the same time because it's easier to know what's working and not working. It's really hard to know what's working and not working when you're writing the screenplay or you're coming up with the premise or whatever. It's just ideas. It's just, I think this might work, let's try it. As you get to the editing, you find out what worked and didn't work. But the actual process is very grueling. I try and, get up and walk around the room every so often to kind of get myself back into it because it's very focused. It's very static work. I don't enjoy that. It's like they say, pro wrestlers talk about like injuries and stuff. And they say, they don't get injured in the ring. They get injured sitting in a car for 12 hours, driving to, the next place, or being on a plane after having a match or whatever. It's the immobility that actually kind of makes you hurt. So editing, you're sitting in a chair. It seems like a cushy job. It's not at all because it's really focused, really intense work. I would much rather be walking around a set because you don't feel it. I have shoots where goes by in like 3 minutes and I was there for like 9 hours and I wouldn't know. Editing's definitely the hardest, but that's filmmaking, man. That's when you're actually making the film. The film is made in the editing room. I'm not the first to say that, but I have to echo it. As a filmmaker, I see the world, I think, a lot more compassionately. I think an artist sees both sides of everything and has to. It's kind of like what they say about doing impressions or doing impersonations of people. You have to love the person you're doing an impersonation of because you're going to pick up on the things about them that somebody who hates them isn't going to. It's like when you see late night talk show hosts do their bad impressions of Trump. It's because they don't like Trump, whereas somebody who does like Trump will pick up on nuances that nobody else will pick up on. And so as a writer, as a filmmaker, if I'm writing about a villain or an unlikable character, because I don't think there are any real villains in my films. I think it's just characters you like, characters you don't like as much or whatever. People behaving in a wrong way, people behaving in a right way. I have to really have love for people that I might not like. That's the job. Really, you have to have more empathy than anybody else as an artist. It shows in the work in spades. Like, it's so clear when a writer doesn't like their characters or one of their characters versus when they like them all. And when I say like, I just mean love. I just mean lets them be themselves without judgment necessarily. That's really one of the key things in art, and I think in filmmaking it comes out a bit stronger because you're creating simulations of life. You're creating scenarios that seem real but are completely out of whole cloth. When you can present the world in that way where it's not necessarily that you're sitting in a moral gray area. You can have very clear morals with your work, but if your villains are unconvincing or if you don't love them, your thing's just gonna suck. One of the things that they talk about with writing villains is a villain should be right about everything except for the one thing that they're wrong about. If you want somebody to be convincingly evil, you have to be with them 99% of it, and then there's that 1% of them that just sucks. They came to the wrong conclusion. And that's the human condition. That's what you have to essentially view other people in this world as. They're right until they're wrong. A murderer is not a murderer until they kill somebody. And that's such a small part of their entire life. It defines them. It's why they're in prison or whatever. It's one moment in time where they put a knife in somebody else's body or shot somebody or whatever. It's a fraction of a second. And if you use that as a metaphor for creating characters, you realize, wow, your job is really to breathe not just life, but morality into the immoral. And that can be misunderstood by people that watch movies or watch whatever they watch. They can think that like you're condoning evil by what you present. It's not true at all. You're depicting it a little bit more fairly and realistically than it's ever depicted in politics or in nonfiction or anything. You really have to deal with humans as your fellow man. They're all your brothers and sisters, essentially. I think if you were to boil down filmmaking into a philosophy, filmmaking is an acknowledgement of the simulation aspect of life. When you understand that, whether or not this world we live in is a simulation or is real or whatever, it doesn't really matter. When you make a film, you are highlighting the simulated aspects of life. So when things are just perfect, when the light is perfect, when somebody says something that's just perfect, some factor in your existence feels created, feels designed, whether it's a sunset that looks like somebody painted it or whatever. Filmmaking is just taking all those moments and just bringing it into this one thing that you can watch, and you're just seeing the highlights of life, essentially. When you're watching a movie, you're rarely seeing somebody having a coughing fit unless it fits the story, or peeing or taking a shower unless it fits the story or whatever. Like any of these moments in life that just don't pertain to the story, you just cut them away. And I think when you make a film, you start to appreciate the film-esque moments of life a lot better, or when you watch movies. And I think it's a great art form for conditioning people to value the beauty in their own lives. And that goes for even horror movies, even dark movies, even dramas, even tragedies. There's something orchestral about these things. It makes moments in your life more tolerable. When you see a movie where something horrible is happening, I don't know that it necessarily makes horrible things happening to you easier in life. It shows you that there's a choreography to everything. There's a dance to fight sequences. A lot of kung fu movies are essentially dance movies. There's a very thin line between like an old Shaw Brothers and like Step Up. Like it's very similar. And knowing that and finding the beauty is something that's very powerful. You see how connected everything is. The filmmaking philosophy, if I were to boil it down, it's about seeing that comedy and drama and sci-fi and any number of these genres, it's all part of the human condition. It's how we see the world. Sometimes things are funny, sometimes things are tragic, but it's all the same medium. It's all part of the experience. It's the human condition. I'm Cody Clarke. Thank you for watching Dreambird. Please like and subscribe and share. Thank you for watching. See you next time.